Television and film often draw their water from the well of great novels. But what's the common refrain? It was okay, but the book is better. Why is that? Well, oftentimes the expanse of your imagination is more vast than can be filled with even $100 million budget and all the bells and whistles of a modern movie studio. Sometimes the instantiation of a great character, no matter how close to the source material, just conflicts with what you always imagined, and that dissonance is always there. Certain books tell their stories primarily through a character's thoughts, depending on exposition, making it difficult for the adaptation to show rather than tell. And other times the story is simply too big to be told in the confines of a 2-hour runtime, as is often the case in movies. Great adaptations seem to embrace these inherent difficulties, accepting that some of the source material cannot be ported in verbatim, and they find creative ways to tell the story, occasionally to the chagrin of the author. They lean into aspects the literary form lacks, like an epic score or soundtrack, and once in a while they show you something on the big screen that you didn't want to just imagine, that you wanted burned into your eyeballs directly. This January, we're getting Netflix's adaptation of The Three-Body Problem, and it is a promising chance to adapt one of the great science fiction epics in recent history. The trailer is out, dropping clues, not just about the first season, but the direction of the entire series. Some of these have huge implications and are downright confounding. We'll dive deep into these clues, make our predictions for Season 1 and beyond, and go over what we're looking forward to most on this channel. A quick note about spoilers. When the season starts, we'll do breakdowns of each episode and not spoil anything from future episodes or from the plotline of the books. For this video, however, massive spoilers abound. If you want a blank slate going into the show or plan on reading the books, pause for the time being. But maybe, just maybe, consider hitting the subscribe button so you catch all the aforementioned content. Let's get started. The first major clue comes from the casting announcements. Cixin Liu's book is a pretty ethnically homogeneous one, with mostly Chinese characters. Not a surprise that Weiss and Benioff, the showrunners of the project and of Game of Thrones fame, would look to broaden their backgrounds a bit. What is a surprise is that they may be doing it with the main character. In the first book, the principal one is the physicist Wang Miao. He is more or less the protagonist. We follow much of the story through his eyes. There is no character by that name in the casting announcements, and much of the speculation seems to be that his character has been split into multiple, possibly as many as 4 characters. Now for the why. I'm going to step on the predictions part of this video, but if you watched Game of Thrones, it seems to be on brand for Weiss and Benioff. They do their best work in character-driven rather than plot-driven storytelling. Cixin Liu's book, The Three-Body Problem, really only has 3 major characters of note. Not a lot of meat on that bone. I think they had to split Wang Miao into multiple characters so that they could do what they do best. More on this in a second. The next casting clue is a bit of a stunner. Irishman and Game of Thrones alum Liam Cunningham is playing Thomas Wade, and New Zealand actress Jess Hong is playing someone named Chong Jin, which sounds a lot like Chong Shin. These two are the principal characters in the 3rd book, Death's End, and don't show up anywhere before then. Does this mean that Netflix is attempting to cram all 3 books into a single season? While this would be a colossally bad idea and would dampen enthusiasm for this adaptation, I don't think we need worry. We do know that the first season consists of 8 one-hour episodes, and the site Pandaily reported that Netflix is producing a total of 24 episodes for this series. This seems to be a pretty clear indication that the trilogy will be told over these 3 seasons and will start with the first book in the series. If we assume this to be true, the next logical conclusion is that Weiss and Benioff will not be telling this story linearly, at least not with respect to the book order. Time is very much a character in this trilogy, to a certain degree in the first book, more in the second, and wildly so in the third. The time jumps due to hibernation as well as relativistic physics impart so strong a feeling of isolation, loneliness, and desperation at times. We've seen time as a character in other science fiction classics done to great effect. It really changes the way we view the stakes for these characters as well as for humanity as a whole. The story arcs for Thomas Wade and Chong Shin do roughly overlap with the elements of the first book, so perhaps their introduction makes sense chronologically, if not in story order. Another major surprise in the casting announcements is a character that does not make sense chronologically. Sophon. Book readers will remember that in the second book, we are introduced to an android who goes by the name Sophon. She is the medium through which the Trisolarans can communicate with the people on Earth, using quantum entanglement to observe and interact in real time. So what is she doing in the first season of Three-Body? I think the answer is simply storytelling. A huge part of the first book are the lowercase Sophon particles. These are the multidimensional devices that the Trisolarans folded into single subatomic particles and sent to Earth from light years away to gather intelligence and generally sandbag human scientific progress, again operating through quantum entanglement. The books are able to explain what the Sophons are doing, but I think the showrunners and writers realize that having critical elements of the story carried out through these invisible subatomic particles was impossible without a ton of exposition. How can you show rather than tell with a flying proton? I think they needed a more or less flesh and blood character to help with this task, and did this by bringing in the beautiful and deadly Sophon early on. George R. R. Martin, in A Song of Ice and Fire, created dozens of great characters, whose fates intersected in myriad ways throughout all of the books. The TV show Game of Thrones advanced this element even further, and arguably did its best work not in the huge set pieces and battle scenes, but in the smaller, poignant collisions between characters. Iron sharpens iron, as they say, but these collisions made the characters deeper, less categorizable, and much more memorable. In order to bring Cixin Liu's trilogy to the screen in a rich tapestry, I think Weiss and Benioff just needed more thread. They needed more of these expected and unexpected collisions. If the protagonist Wang Miao is in fact being split into multiple characters, it's probably for this reason. If you're going to tell the story of Changxin as not just a bleeding heart rube who fumbles away our civilization's fate in the critical hour, perhaps it needed to be done earlier and through more of these smaller examinations and moments. This is probably what I'm looking forward to most. The characters in this trilogy are memorable, but there's a criticism that I had. Some of them are a little bit boxy. This may be cultural in part, with the collectivist nature of Eastern societies versus the individualist nature of the West and whatnot. Fortunately, this is right in Weiss and Benioff's wheelhouse. Yuan Jia's transformation from an innocent academic into a traitorous genocidal villain, whose embers of humanity yet still glow ever so faintly in her cryptic message to Luo Ji, will be a fascinating journey. I'm looking forward to them fleshing out all of Dasha's bluster and shrewdness and avuncular personality. Liam Cunningham, who has seemingly always played, as he recently said in an interview, the quote, soft moral compass kind of character, will be taking on a diametrically different one in Thomas Wade, a calculating, monstrous anti-hero, the yang to Changxin's yin, someone who inspires fear, curiosity, revulsion, and respect all at once. Love them or hate them, these are the roles in movies and television that we never forget. In a similar vein, something else to look forward to is the dialogue. Throughout the books, one thing that did not always land in the English translation was the verbal exchanges between these characters. I freely admit that much may have been lost in translation. I'd be interested to know from many readers of the original Chinese text whether it was much better there. Nonetheless, I anticipate the writers of the Netflix adaptation will get a chance to exercise their conversational muscle in some of these meetings between our favorite characters. One thing they do not seem to have announced is who the composer will be for this series. I'll be more than a little bit bummed if it's not Ramin Djawadi. Known for his scores in Game of Thrones as well as shows like HBO's Westworld, he brings it every time. And if he's on board, I think we're in for some gorgeous accompaniments that should echo the themes of desolation, loneliness, love, inevitability, and hope that run through this trilogy. Lastly, falling into the things I want to have burned into my eyeballs category are the large set-piece sequences. Game of Thrones had some of these grand cinematic moments: Battle of Blackwater Bay, Beyond the Wall, Cersei's revenge set to the Light of the Seven. Three Body Problem is sure to have its share. The plan to intercept the ETO's ship Judgment Day in the Panama Canal, the Tarantino-esque mutual backstabbing between the human interstellar ships that escape the solar system, and of course, if there's going to be a red wedding type moment in this series, albeit in the second season, it will be the droplet attack scene. At the risk of building up way too much hype way too early, I think that moment promises to be an all-timer for me personally. We'll see what happens, but I fully expect Jaws to be on the floor. Some of the predictions thus far aren't a great leap based on the information released. This one is less of a prediction than a hope. Netflix typically drops all the episodes for a season at once and lets people binge ad libitum. We're no longer in the prestige TV era where we wait with bated breath for the next episode and then obsess over it for the following week. I used to go to this bar in Brooklyn to see the latest episode of Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, especially when it neared the end of those series, with a room full of strangers in hushed, rapt attention. If there was ever a reason to go back to that weekly rationed model of releasing episodes, I think it's this one. Since last year, Netflix has been toying around with the idea of parceled releases, and I'm hoping they consider it for Three Body Problem. Another prediction is that each season of the show may not represent each book. I think the first book is the easiest to tell in 8 episodes, while the last book would be the hardest, mainly due to time jumps. As the trilogy goes on, the story leaps forward in larger and larger chunks, sometimes hundreds of years at a time. In television and film, as opposed to books, time jumps are a little bit more jarring to an audience and often difficult to execute. There are some examples of it being done well, but it can be tricky and confusing. They may well be more expensive and time-consuming on the production side as well. If Weiss and Benioff follow the overall story arc of the books, fitting all of the third book, Death's End, into 8 episodes will be quite a challenge. I also don't anticipate they'll go forwards and backwards in time repeatedly and will try to limit the number of these time jumps, hence introducing Thomas Wade and Changxin in Season 1. Alright, that's a wrap. Hope you've enjoyed the episode. I look forward to having you with me when Season 1 arrives in January. Till then.